Hello again, and welcome back in to the works. I'm Jim.
I'm Diane.
Today we're going to get into PhotoFracking, which I know that word doesn't mean anything. We invented a word several years ago, and because no, go ahead.
In light of what we're talking about, video recordings and Big Brother and how digital media works. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So, and of course, as much as we wanted these not to be super topical, is that the right word I'm looking for? I don't want these to be dated when we talk. It's not that, again, it's not that I want it to be generic, but you know, when you talk too much about current stuff, then 6 months from now it won't be as interesting. Yeah, but maybe we're still trying to figure this whole podcast thing out. Speaking of the podcast, I noticed we, hello Moscow. We have a listener in Moscow, Russia.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, again, you remember I was throwing all those stats about Facebook and listeners, and well, Facebook users. I just wonder how real that is. You know, maybe it's a VPN in Moscow, and it's somebody just right around the corner. Because that's how that stuff works, right?
I know. But this morning I was confused that on Facebook for our podcast, it said we had 14 followers. And then when I click on it, it said I had 19 followers, but then only 7 names showed up. So
someone explain that to us. How does that work? That's probably why I'm not ruining my life with social media worry constantly. Right. But PhotoFracking was a word that we invented several years ago.
The concept.
Actually applied for a patent. Now I just doxed myself, but that's okay. You can find it. Godspeed. And of course, the Guthrie situation is in the news a lot. And one of the things that we had talked about with, you had saw or read about a Super Bowl commercial that if you lost your dog, they can pull all the different cameras in an area and start looking for dogs to help you find your lost dog, right? But and then similarly, after that discussion, the authorities have asked for everyone's security cameras from you know, the week prior, and there's actually some specific times that they're looking for. They're looking for, but it's
and that relates to what our PhotoFracking
concept is, yeah. Right? But as of today, they've got 3 people in custody or detained.
Right. We're
learning the difference between the two, and it was 2 people and their mother. Which, boy, that sounds like the perfect made for TV movie. Later. I'm just wondering who's going to play mom.
Right.
It almost reminded me of, I guess maybe they can get that lady from Throw Mama from the Train. Yeah. I guess it depends on what, you know, the
right.
You know, these folks, you know, demographics of these folks. But so, and they were found at a Culver's.
That was a different person.
Oh, okay. So there was, okay. Which, if you're not familiar with Culver's, that's the home of the Butter Burger.
Yeah.
Which has nothing to do with butter and burgers. It's just the bun that's got
butter.
Right. Anyway. So it made me think about the fact that the authorities are looking for footage from all these other different sources to try to stitch, if you will, as that was part of what our concept of PhotoFracking was all about, is that you could stitch photos together from different sources based on, and the key idea, and we were trying to develop this concept of PhotoFracking for different angles. Security was one of them. Memories, another one. You know, and you'll maybe understand a little bit better as I explain it. But so, with any digital media, you know, one of the concerns that we had with the cameras and the algorithms that they use to find things, you know, it made me feel a little better as we discovered it's not like the cameras are on all the time. they're in low power mode, or what they're doing is they're looking for movement or looking for a heat signature. Then they basically turn on the recording function while they've buffered a few seconds or, minutes, and however long it takes for these programs to detect something, right? Is it worthy of being recorded? Unlike your dash cam, it's on all the time.
Right.
But it's basically looping over itself. So anyway, so the PhotoFracking concept is that
When you take a picture.
or any media, it could be video,
Right.
but specifically what we were after is a standard behind a file and its attributes. I don't want to get, I know.
The metadata.
Everyone's rolling their eyes. It's tech talk. Let me think about it. So you share a file, and, we know about the basic attributes of a file and the quote metadata. Remember when big data was a big thing recently, and that kind of has been overshadowed by the idea of AI doing the things that big data did. But it was just the matter of looking for markers or patterns, or in this case, a lot of cases, it was looking for the metadata within a file or several files.
When we know about timestamp, right?
So yeah, when any file is created, whether it's a text file or a JPEG or, whatever file you have on your computer, there's a create date. You see that in your File Explorer, right? Create date, file, sometimes you can expand the attributes that you see in File Explorer. You get your name. You got things like create date, update date, and you could add things like author. You could actually put information or meta tags in the metadata so that it becomes searchable. So, for example, you think how clever it is that, Windows can find all of your photos. Well, I mean, it's just looking for what, JPEGs, PNGs, or files that might have a meta tag of, memories.
Right. But unfortunately, when you share your files or your images, a lot of that metadata doesn't follow over.
There was the concept with Samsung phones, and maybe even the cameras years ago, but the phones in particular, I remember and we've always been a fan of the Samsung Note. If you want to send us one, we'll talk about it. But the Samsung Note, the concept of a dog ear. Remember when you would go through old stacks of photos
that Grandma had,
and then Grandma was well beyond her time. Why? Because she wrote a date on the back of the photo
and where it was,
and exactly other things, like the day that Dad was upset with her, or again, simply not trying to make a joke, but Grandma was ahead of her time when we would, and the term was dog ear, right? Write something on the back of your photo. That's metadata, right? That's an attribute of that photo. It helps you remember
what it was about,
what it was, or when it was exactly, or whatever was written on it. And the Samsung cameras had this concept of a dog ear, whereas you could literally, because again, they were from the Note platform, which the Notes in the Samsung world are famous for. You have a stylus and you can write anything on them that, you can basically, it's taken I guess for lack of a better, it's like a JPEG, but they had a special format for it. Long story short, you could write on the back of your file things, and then you could exchange those with other folks with Samsung Notes. But the rub was that data was only visible to those that had that application or the ability to see the note, photo, dog ear metadata. Right? If you didn't have a note because you hand wrote it, our goal when we created the PhotoFracking framework around applying for a patent was to standardize on these file attributes. And in particular, where it would be incredibly valuable, considering what's going on in the Guthrie case, is that unlike someone obtrusively looking through video footage, or us again fearing that these cameras that are capturing everything, someone's sitting in a big tower somewhere and perusing through all of our videos. The idea of the metadata, the attributes associated with the file, if you included the basic things, and we proposed that coordinates, GPS coordinates, latitude, longitude, altitude, and a timestamp. And again, I am making some assumptions. Most people in these photos are coming from either a system that, of course, is installed at home. So it's very easy to get your location information
Mm-hmm.
as long as you turn it on.
True. Yeah, he just gave me the side eye.
But the point is that so it's not that this information is difficult.
It just needs to
It
be
just needs to be captured
and have a standard for it.
consistently.
Well, and for the fun part of it, we're getting into
Well,
the
Yeah, let's explain what our idea as far as why. So step one was to create the consistent attributes. Time, altitude, latitude, coordinates, lon, altitude, time. And with that, just those attributes, which are not obtrusive as far as personal information, giving anything away, right? That information could be stored, or if stored with photos that were taken, let's say, and of course most of these are in the cloud, but you could run a query on that database, say, I want to see all the pictures from all the phones or all the devices from where the Guthries were between this day and this date and this time and this time. Now, yeah, you might have some folks 2 blocks over that are having a rip-roaring party and just taking pictures outside for fun, but boy, oh boy, what if in the background there was something that was captured? Point is, having that information consistently available on a media image.
right. People are sharing all these photos anyway. Yeah, it could just be from social media. You could scour.
But like I said, my point, one of our selling angles, or at least the idea, we thought commercially, this if we had created the standard. So again, if you want to do some homework, or again, any input anyone has is certainly welcome.
Let me give them the hallmark version of what you could do with this. Everybody's into these elaborate proposals. Say you're doing it on the pier in Myrtle Beach, right? And you have certain pictures. Wouldn't it be interesting if you could search for anybody that was there that day that has pictures at that location, and you could kind of do a 360 version of it, because you have what your photographer was taking, but you might be in the background of somebody else's photo.
It's a candid, right? So
Yeah.
it's
a 360,
if you will,
not
stitching the photo,
Mm-hmm.
photo stitching from other sources. Now, again, certainly permissions would have to be available. Part of
Right.
what commercially we were trying to do, at least creating the standard, and where I was going with it is that technically there are only a handful of standards that exist for any electronic data file. That's descriptive metadata, structural metadata, reference metadata, statistical metadata, and legal metadata. And of course, I could explain what all those are, but descriptive are things like, date, time, and then the things that maybe sometimes, your camera will let you put in your name. Structural metadata is how that file was put together. For example, is it a Word file? Is it an Excel file? Reference information or reference metadata. When was the last time it was open? You know how with Word it tells you you've been working on this thing for a while. That's part of the metadata. That's part of the standard set of attributes. Statistical. Again, things such as, how often is the file open? It's amazing to me, and legal things like copyright holder name, public domain or not. And it's amazing to me that we have those, but we don't have, why not capture the location?
Right.
Or at least, again, as all phones do, all phones are current, at any given moment, the triangulation of the cell towers, that's what location, that's what having a, location turned on does for you. But to your point, it was that, so creating this standard for attributes.
And what gets transferred when.
Well, that's another issue. We've noticed that, even building a podcast, that there are certain attributes that don't transfer over when I'm moving a file from one platform to another. It blows my mind that to me that's almost altering the original file. I mean, what do you have to do? Put a read-only marker on it. But even though, again, maybe it's because it's again cross-platform, we'd have to come up with that standard that goes for Wintel and Linux. The CISC versus RISC operating systems. Maybe there is, maybe that's what the issue is. But so it was coming up with the attributes, then coming up with some commercially viable ideas, which again we had, like I said, the idea of Diane pointed out special event.
Yeah. What if there was, this amazing, at the Super Bowl, God knows this Super Bowl was not exciting, but this amazing catch, this amazing play. And you had all these people in the stands and they were taking pictures, and that you would be able to see it from every viewpoint instead of just the cameras that were there that you got to see on TV. I mean, it just, so if you're a fanatic, you would pay for something like that.
And the idea then we went further. So commercially viable idea, kind of neat. The other idea or the other selling aspect of having consistent metadata for images, security.
Mm-hmm.
So you had somebody leave a package somewhere, and yes, again you have all these cameras that are trained on it, but what about those that were there inadvertently capturing something in the background? You'd only know to look at those photos, one, if they actually had seen it, or two, posted it somewhere saying, hey, look what's in the background. But if you have the metadata, you could query that. And so tying that into a current event, like I said, how amazing would it be if, again, innocent pictures from the neighbor's house,
mm-hmm.
that you had you had no intent on capturing something that turned out to be bad, but in reality, it was something that might help lead you to finding somebody.
Right. Well, we learned something interesting with data that's being tracked at events. Not, this is a sidebar to the Guthrie case, but
well, actually, it's
doing
not.
events, the placer data.
Well, so that's where I think, and again, good segue. We're going there next. Is that so? Aside from the PhotoFracking, photo stitching idea, where you have metadata that's consistent across all file platforms with latitude, longitude, altitude, time, there is now technology through your phone. Now, it's not an image, but so as you can continue to explain, there is technology now. I believe, or I'm surprised that they haven't hauled on this, but to Diane's point, that there are companies out there that have contracted with the different apps that you give permission to.
Location.
That know your location. So go explain what this, and again, I'm sure that the one that we know of, Placer, but there are others in the industry.
So we had learned at an event that we did that you can request Placer data, and it tracks cell phones in a certain area. So they know where you are, how many people are there, and where you come from. At least that's how it was applied at the event that we went to. So you could send out to all these phones that were in the area, and then they could voluntarily submit their photos for PhotoFracking to help an event. But I was just amazed that they know we were at an event.
Well, but to expand on that, so yes, everyone else is rolling their eyes. Yeah, let's say the guy that walked up with the backpack that we're all looking for, and
had
the
his
Guthrie
phone,
case,
yeah.
had his phone on him.
I know.
Of course, most criminals are idiots. But if he didn't have it on him, I'm sure it might be in the car, right?
Right, because we're trained to always have it on or near.
Or you look for, again, interesting patterns of those phones. Now, keep in mind, and hopefully so the way this works is that your cell phone is constantly pinging a cell tower. So these companies have paired up with these applications, and it might be innocuous. It might be your damn weather app. I don't know which one it is. They're going to tell.
Right.
But what they do is that you can ask for, at any given moment in history, give them a location, your house, and you can say, I want to see all those that came within 100 feet of my house for the last 2 weeks. And here's the interesting part is, again, unbeknownst to you, you've given basically with, again, location identity on.
Right. It's public information.
It's information available through these apps, but it's information. So think about what also goes with that. So the attributes, if you will, with your phone. So it'll tell you how many people passed within your little geolocation that you asked for. So I think we read that one of the examples is that franchises look for, traffic. I mean, let's face it, things are more sophisticated than that little line, that rubber line that was across the street that you knew was counting cars.
Yeah.
And whenever you saw one of those, you're thinking, oh, there's a new development going in. But you know what I'm talking about, those. It was
traffic
like
count. Yeah.
right. It was back in the days when you drove over that little little rubber
strip across the road,
and that would ding ding in the service station to go have somebody come out and pump your gas.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God, how many generations don't know what that is? But yeah, the same concept. You know what? You understand? I think we all know what we're talking about. Where you have these things you drive over to, basically it's traffic count. Well, hell, you don't need that anymore.
Mm-mm.
We have the ability through location identity, ping or collect data on cell phones based on geolocation, based on lat, lon, altitude, what you've done and where you've been. Now, I know that Google has that history thing where it will, track your, going here, going there, anytime you leave your home base, but it works in reverse. And let's face it, it's tracking you. So the things that's interesting that you can collect from that is, let's face it, what are you collecting? You're collecting the cell phone, which means you know the owner or the person on the account,
mm-hmm.
and you know where they live, and all those attributes that go with that cell phone that passed within that parameter that you gave of how many people, or cell phones in this case, and you can then extrapolate, right? Like I said in the franchise ideas, folks, franchisees look for this as a way to count whether or not you're going to get enough foot traffic into your Nothing But Cake store if you decide to open one of those up, which we're a big fan of, Nothing But Cake. But yeah, that's they're using. I'm surprised they haven't used that technology. But again, back to my point, and like you were saying, that you would know at least who one was in the area. But even more interestingly, like you point out, Diane, is that you could ask them for photos if
mm-hmm.
they had any, or if
right,
if you had that standard, you wouldn't necessarily need it. But yeah,
but that standard, that field needs to be uneditable, because you don't want somebody to
inconsistent.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that there is no standard, and that's the moral of the story. There's no standard for images that are saved and captured on your phone. Like I said, that the advantage of security cameras around your house is that, let's face it, we know where you're at. I mean, you got an account with somebody, we basically got location there. It's that was the whole idea of stitching photos, if you will, to either recreate memories in a good way or, in this case, a bad way. Maybe help identify those that aren't normally supposed to be in the area. They're in the area. And like I said, with that, you know how far they've come from or how close they really are.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was our
I liked
claim to fame.
The name, because when you're mining something, a lot of
that's
time
where
that's called fracking.
Yeah, so forgive us. I didn't really explain. Yeah,
yeah.
PhotoFracking meant
you're mining the data of photos. So PhotoFracking. Ta-da!
So, there you go.
Boy, we're into a little bit of everything, aren't we?
Yeah, I guess that's the problem.
Yeah, ADHD
All these projects,
much.
and none of them get. My project for the last 2 days was clean the bathroom. Well, guess what I'm doing? Not right now. Not cleaning the bathroom.
Yeah.
The other day we were talking about odd Olympic sports or events, right? Which we'll go into detail some other time. An upcoming show, podcast. But remember, I made the joke about, and actually, I should do more research into what motorboating was. But we made a joke.
It is Valentine's Day, so there might be a lot of motorboating going on.
Yeah, if you're lucky. I guess, or depending on who's doing it versus receiving it, right? We were talking about the pigeon shooting and then the dueling. And then you made the comment about, there can't be, we joke,
there's no redemption. You lose.
You lose, but there's no judging, and then the, cliche Russian judge not scoring you well if it was
that actually happened with was it the French?
How was that? Yep. So
figure skating.
History repeats itself. Real things in life are you can't make up are funny. But yeah, the French skating couple.
It was at ice dancing.
Yeah, one of them. But yeah, the French couple wasn't favored. The U.S. couple was favored. And sure enough, controversy exists because the French judges gave the U.S. couple
dismal
the worst score, and they gave their country's entry the best score. And the French then won. So see, history repeats itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then sadly, the quad god, I don't mean to spoil it, because here's again, we were talking about streaming not too long ago, and our daughter, who I'd offered to watch it live, here we go again, dating our how old are we, watching it live versus watching it streaming on Peacock, hasn't completed part 1, so didn't want to see the outcome. So now has to avoid all media until she gets through part 2 to know that the quad god didn't do so well.
Right.
Very sad. He was upset. That one won't give it away in case you haven't watched.
Well, you kind of just did, but
it does.
No, I know you didn't.
I didn't say
give
what
details.
exactly happened.
Right.
And then just to finish up where we started, hello to Moscow.
Yeah.
Since I'm always looking for sponsors, what are they famous for? Oh, vodka.
Yeah. Right.
So bring some.
I was just giggling over the talking to my elderly father years ago. There was a new drink, and he called it the Russian donkey, and he meant to say Moscow mule.
That's fine.
It's close. It's close.
Well, yeah, like I get Badland Chugs. I finally got his name right. What did I kept calling him? Sir Chugs a lot?
Yeah.
It happens when you hit that last age group in the demographic, which...
It's all.
Sad things happen. Well, once again, we appreciate you spending a little time with us. I'm Jim.
I'm Diane.
And you're listening to The Works.